In this lecture, we are going to review the files generated by the Create View package. Most of the files should be familiar to us. Since we selected a few tools during installation, there will be new files in our project. Let's focus on the new files. First, we're going to focus on the files in the root directory. The first file is called eslint.rc.csj. This file contains the configuration settings for eslint. Inside the exported object, there are a few settings being added. The first setting is called root. It's completely acceptable for subdirectories to have different rules. You can create a configuration file from within a directory. ESLint will apply the rules from the inner directory instead of the configuration file in the root directory. We can specify a root configuration file by setting this property to true. Up next, we have an array called extends. Configuring the rules for ESLint can be tedious. There are dozens of rules. Our file would become very large. To avoid large files, we can apply rules from other configuration files. In this array, we are applying rules from 3 files. The first file is called View Essential. There are rules for checking the code quality of View components. Next, there's the ESLint recommended rules. These rules are the recommended rules from the ESLint package. Lastly, there's the prettier rules. As we discussed before, prettier may conflict with the rules from ESLint. To avoid conflicts, this file configures ESLint not to clash with prettier. For most projects, the configuration settings from these files will be more than suitable. Let's move on to the last property. It's called overrides. Sometimes, we may not want to apply the same rules to all files. We can use special rules for specific files by adding this array. In this array, each object can represent a set of files. In this example, a special set of rules are being applied to Cypress test files. Overall, that does it for the ESLint configuration file. Before moving on to the next file, check out the resource section of this lecture for a link to a style guide. The style guide lists recommended guidelines for formatting and writing code. I want to emphasize the word recommended. Most of these guidelines are optional. Vue has 4 categories of rules. They are the essential, strongly recommended, recommended, and use with caution categories. Rules in the essential category are considered highly important. We must follow these rules. Otherwise, we may encounter errors in our application. You should always follow them as they are considered standard practice. The other categories contain optional rules. The last category is called Use with Caution. The rules in the Use with Caution category are rules that are for special edge cases. They're not something you should regularly use unless you need to. Throughout this course, I'm going to try my best to follow the rules specified by Vue. At times, I may deviate from these rules to better explain concepts. One example is that it's recommended not to perform log statements in our code. However, we may need to log values for debugging purposes. Feel free to adhere to these rules as you wish. ESLint has been configured to follow most of these rules. Head back to the editor. Let's move on to the next file. The cypress.config.js file contains the settings for the Cypress tool. Cypress is a tool for performing testing on an application. Testing is a topic covered in this course. For now, we're going to ignore this file until we talk about testing. There may be errors in this file. You can safely ignore them. They will not impact our application. Moving on, let's check out the package file. Inside this file, we're going to find an extensive list of dependencies. We'll explore them as we progress through the course. Let's shift our focus to the scripts object. We don't have the usual list of commands. The Create View package will supply us with additional commands. 3 commands are related to tests. Once again, these commands will be reviewed during the testing section of this course. You can safely ignore them. The last command is for linting our project. In an upcoming lecture, we are going to automate linting. It'll be easier to automate this process as opposed to running a command. Overall, these are the major changes in the root directory. Let's start looking at the folders. The first folder is called VS Code. This directory may be available for some of you. If it is, this folder will contain settings for Visual Studio Code. You may get warnings from the editor. If you don't want to constantly receive warnings, you can safely delete this directory. I'm going to quickly do so. The public directory is mostly the same as before. We have the favicon file, nothing else to it. The most significant change is in the source directory. Unlike before, 3 directories have been created, called Views, Stores, and Router. We'll be exploring these directories throughout the project. Don't worry about them. We'll soon become comfortable with everything. Within the Components directory, a new directory was created called Tests. It's another directory for writing tests. Tests are a topic we'll cover in a separate section. That sums up everything. In the next lecture, let's start configuring our editors to format our code.